In the quiet corners of historical archives, artifacts often whisper forgotten tales. This unassuming stationery envelope, bearing the name of Thomas Jefferson Riche-a-Lieu Faulkner and adorned with an official Liberian stamp, is one such relic. Dating from the early 20th century, it hints at special privileges granted to a man whose ingenuity made him indispensable to a young nation. But to understand its significance, we must first journey to the land it hails from, Liberia. Welcome to the video. I am your postal history curator, Joseph. Nestled on Africa's western coast, Liberia spans roughly 111,000 square kilometers. A compact nation of dense rainforest, rolling hills, and beaches battered by the Atlantic surf. Its story begins not with ancient African kingdoms, but in the turbulent politics of the United States. In 1816, the American Colonization Society, the ACS, founded by figures like Henry Clay and Bushrod Washington, aimed to establish a colony for free African American slaves and freeborn blacks. The first settlers landed on Sherbet Island in 1820, part of modern-day Sierra Leone, but disease and hardship forced a move. On January 7, 1822, they arrived at Dazo Island, now Providence Island, at the mouth of the Mesurado River, establishing a settlement initially called Christopolis. In 1824, it was renamed Monrovia after US President James Monroe, a key ACS supporter, making it one of only two world capitals named for an American president. Though never formally a US colony, Washington rejecting such proposals, Liberia still functioned as an American outpost. The US provided financial aid, naval protection, and drafted Liberia's 1847 constitution, mirroring America's with a president, a bicameral legislature, and a flag echoing the Stars and Stripes. By the late 1800s, over 16,000 African Americans had settled, forming an elite Americo-Liberian class that dominated politics and the economy, often marginalizing indigenous groups like the Vai, the Kru, and the Bassa. Into this world stepped Thomas Jefferson Riche-a-Lieu Faulkner, born in North Carolina in 1869 to a modest family. He immigrated to Liberia at age 12 in 1881, chasing opportunity in the Promised Land. He trained at New York's prestigious Cooper Union, and after graduating, Faulkner returned to Monrovia as a brilliant engineer. He installed Liberia's first ice factory and ice cream plant, introduced a telephone system, and attempted to electrify the city. He alone could dredge the deadly sandbar at Monrovia's harbour, boosting trade, and was the go-to expert for repairing major machinery. As mayor of Monrovia during World War I, Faulkner faced a dramatic crisis when Liberia, having joined the Allies in August 1917, became a target of Kaiser Wilhelm's navy. On the night of April the 9th to the 10th, 1918, the German Type U-151 submarine, SMU-154, under Corvettan Captain Hermann Grech, surfaced off Monrovia's coast, armed with 205mm deck guns and 18 torpedoes. U-154 was a commerce raider. Grech sent a boat ashore with a letter to President Daniel Edward Howard, releasing prisoners from the sunken Liberian schooner. President Howard, or luck per conflicting report states. The letter read, "I have no desire to cause further harm to the Liberian people, being convinced that you have been drawn into a war against your will. The capital of Liberia is at present helpless under the German guns. If the wireless and cable station of Monrovia do not at once cease their work, I shall regret being obligated to open fire on them." President Howard's cabinet vowed loyalty to the Allies, but sent an ambiguous reply. Grech impatiently demanded the French flag be lowered and the wireless station destroyed within an hour. At 4 p.m, U-154 unleashed about 20 shells, demolishing the French wireless station. Stray rounds hitting central Monrovia, killing 4 to 7 civilians, including children and an elderly man. Faulkner, as mayor, coordinated the city's response, maintaining order and minimizing casualties in a defenseless city. Contemporary accounts praised his calm leadership, with one local report noting, "Mayor Faulkner's steady hand kept Monrovia from descending into chaos." German records later expressed regret that U-154 targeted the French station rather than the German cable station, though the raid succeeded in disrupting Allied communications. U-154 was sunk a month later on May 11, 1918. Faulkner was also later involved in political corruption inside the country, as in 1927 he challenged President Charles D.B. King's dictatorial rule of the People's Party ticket. Only to lose in history's most fraudulent election, King claimed 230,000 votes in a nation with only 15,000 voters. Undeterred, Faulkner exposed a horrific scandal. Indigenous Liberians were being forced into labor on Spanish Fernando Po's cocoa plantations, orchestrated by American Liberia elites linked to US interests like Firestone Rubber. In his June 20th, 1929 letter to the League of Nations, Faulkner wrote, "Because President King believed himself immune from harm or influence as a self-instituted dictator, I seek to prevent what is sure to come if the League does not interpose and stop this oppression of the native people. That is a bloody fight or a revolution." His evidence, presented in America and Geneva, sparked a 1930 League investigation, forcing King's resignation. Retaliation was brutal. Forces in Liberia sought to brand Faulkner as a traitor. He was threatened with treason charges and faced economic sabotage. His business, ice factory, ice cream plant, telephone system were all boycotted and physically destroyed by elite-backed mobs. Assassination attempts also marked his life, as in 1902 he survived a shooting by Dr. J.R.A. Grossland, possibly over a personal dispute. Post-1929 threats escalated, with rumours of mystical intimidation tactics like a 1930 plot involving a buried girl with Faulkner's name on strings. He ran again in 1931, losing amid more fraud, and continued on as a lawyer into 1934. On February 2nd, 1943, at age 74, Faulkner died crossing the Marshall sandbar he had once tamed. Officially an accident, but whispers of foul play linger, given his enemies. Today this envelope symbolises Faulkner's fight. The Thomas J.R. Faulkner College of Science and Technology in Liberia honours the engineer who dared to expose Liberia's shadows. In a nation forged by American dreams, yet scarred by inequality, Faulkner's story and his simple piece of stationery reveal the cost of true liberty. So let's analyse the cover. So let's look at the front of the cover. And the first thing that I'll draw your attention to is the top left here. We can see that there's an inscription which reads H.H. Jones, which is an indication that it could have been sent by somebody of this name, either perhaps by them or on behalf of Faulkner. It's always a possibility, but it's not provable. I have tried to do some research on the name, and I did find a doctor of that name who would have been within the same social circles as Faulkner at the time. However, that doesn't exactly marry up, and also a doctor would put doctor actually in front, I would think. So I'm not so sure about that. So that remains a mystery. It's going to England. It's addressed to May and Baker Company, and again, they're related to the pharmaceutical medical industry, and there would be a useful company for a man like Faulkner to be in contact with, to maybe procure medical supplies and other things for Monrovia, potentially. And that also, of course, does match up with the doctor, but I'm not completely sold on that. As you can see, there's discoloration, and what is very evident is this central fold in the middle of the letter. So there are condition issues, definitely. Moving on to the stamps, we have a local motif, stamps from 1928. Even though the cancel is indistinct, I do believe that it is a Liberian Monrovia cancel. I've compared it to other examples, I believe that's the case, but it is indistinct, and it is tying the stamps to the cover. So starting to look at this 2-cent stamp here, we can see that it's torn, and on this bottom left corner, I don't know if you can see there, but there is a foreign paper adhering to the stamp, which would suggest that it's been reused, repurposed, taken off something for use. So potentially it was unfranked. And moving on to this stamp, which is very interesting. It's an official use with the overprint for official service on it, and that wouldn't have been available in the shops for anybody to go and buy. You would only have access to that if you were in the government and the letter was being sent on in an official capacity. So it's possible that this was also unused and reutilized by the same person who sent this. That's not impossible, but perhaps it's a little less unlikely and a bit more curious as how a person would obtain this stamp and not be in government. So turning back over, we can see that it is definitely, without question, Thomas J.R. Faulkner's stationery, and there's a standard wax seal there. You would hope for perhaps a more ornate one, but I would think by the mid-20th century people would just have a generic seal, perhaps, and not bother with the earlier 19th century elaborate personal seals. And curiously also, there's no evidence here of a receiving mark for it arriving in the UK, and again it is possible that it could have been hand delivered maybe at some point, but it's a bit strange there's not a receiving mark. So quite an interesting cover. I hope you found this video interesting as well as the philatelic item. Please like, comment and subscribe, or even suggest videos and philatelic material or subjects that you would like to see in a future video. Until then, thank you and see you on the next one.